We continue now at the top of Daf Ayin Amud Beis in Meseches Nedarim. This is Nedarim Daf 70b. On the previous summit, the Gemara had asked, how do we know that if the Orus dies, that the father has the ability on his own to nullify the Nedarim of his daughter? And the Gemara says it comes from a Hekesh because the Pasuk says, Vim Hoyosia, talks about an Arusa, and it uses that double language, Makish Kodme Havaya Shania, Lekodme Havaya Rishona. So therefore we compare the Nedarim that happened before her second Erisin to the Nedarim that she took before the first Erisin. Ma Kodme Havaya Rishona, just like the Nedarim that she took before the first Erisin, Av Mefer L'chudei. We know that the father had the ability to annul those on his own. That was before she was ever an Arusa. So Av Kodme Havaya Shnia, so too the Nedarim that she took before her second Erisin, that's after she was already an Arusa the first time, Av Mefer L'chudei. The father has the ability to annul those on his own. That's what we learn from that comparison. But the Gemara says, Ema hanimili b'nedarim shelo niru la'aros. Maybe that's only true about the nedarim that never appeared before the aros. Meaning maybe we're talking about nedarim that the aros never knew about. So those nedarim the father is able to annul on his own. Aval b'nedarim sheniru la'aros. But those nedarim that came before the aros, that he had the ability, that the aros had the ability together with the father to annul those vows. So maybe lo matzi meifarav. Maybe the father on his own is not able to annul those. And the Gemara says, no, even nedarim shelo niru la'aros. If all we were including was the nedarim that did not appear before the aros, that the aros was not aware of, mi benurea beis avia nafka. That's already learned from a different pasuk, from the pasuk of benurea beis avia, that when she's a nara, she's in the house of her father, she's under the control of her father. That's what that pasuk already indicates, and therefore this pasuk is talking even about nedarim that were niru la'aros. Even those, the father does have the ability to annul those vows when the husband dies. And the Mefarish explains, Makish Kodme Havoya Shnia, we compare the Nedarim that took place before the second Erisin. Kilomar, what it means to say is as follows, Shemeis Aros Rishon, meaning let's say she has Erisin the first time and then that Aros dies. And at this point in time, she is fit to have a second Erisin. She doesn't necessarily need to have a second Erisin for this Hekesh to work. The point is those Nedarim that happen after the first Aros dies, we compare those Nedarim to the Nedarim that took place before the first Erisin. L'kodme Havoya Rishona, to the Nedarim that took place before that first Erisin. Shalonis Arsaliola, meaning when she was not an Arusa at all, V'yosheves Nara B'veisavia, when she was a Nara in the house of her father, Ma'kodme V'chulo, just like, of course, those Nedarim, before there was ever an Erisin, the father has the ability to annul those vows, so too after the Erisin, after the Aros dies, the father has that ability. And again, the Gemara said, maybe Hani Mili Da'av Mefer B'kodme Havoya Shnia B'nedarim Shelo Niru La'aros Rishon. Maybe the father only has the ability to annul the vows that never came before the Aros. Ilo Shama Lu Abal Kodem Shayamas, meaning the husband didn't hear about it. The Hainu Dumya the Kodem Havoya Rishon. That would be similar to the Nedarim that took place before the first Erisin. The husband never knew about those, of course. And so therefore also the other Nedarim that we're talking about after the Aros dies, it's talking about the ones that he did not hear about, and maybe only those the father has the ability to annul. Aval bin Nedarim sheniru la'aros sheshama behen kodem sheyamas, if he heard about them. V'lo hispek lahafer, he didn't have a chance to annul them. Eino av mefer ad shetachzor v'tisaris sheyafiru hu v'achron. So then maybe the father is not able to do it unless she actually has another Erisin, and then they're able to do it in partnership. And the Gemara ultimately answered that if we were talking about Nedarim Shelo Niru La'aros, that's already learned from a different pasuk. That's learned from Mibenu Reha Beis Avia, and therefore again the Hekesh of the two Avoyos, that comes to say even Nedarim Sheniru La'aros, even those the father is able to annul on his own. Mibenu Reha Nafka, again it's learned from Mibenu Reha. We'll go with the second explanation of the Mefarish Perush Acher. Aval b'Nedarim Sheniru La'aros, when it comes to Nedarim Sheniru La'aros that the Aros knew about, Lo Matzi Meifar Ileka Aros Achron. So we suggested maybe he's not able to annul those unless he has a partner. Halo Moses Amr, you can't say that. You can't say that the Hekesh is to include the Nedarim that the Aros did not know about, because we already have another pasuk for that. We already know that. That's learned out from Binu Reha Beis Avia. We say that everything that she profits, so to speak, from the time that she's a Nara, it all belongs to her father. And that means to say that the father does have the rights in terms of the annulment of her vows. And therefore we know that the comparison from Hayosia, that comes to include Linedarim Sheniru La'aros Huda. So that includes even Nedarim that the Aros was aware of. Even those, if the Aros dies, the father has the ability to annul those on his own. And the Gemara continues at the two dots. The Mishnah said, "Bozeh yipa koach ha'av mi koach habal v'chulu." It said, in this way, the father has greater strength than the husband, but in another way, the husband has greater strength than the father, and that's by a bogeres. By a bogeres, the husband is able to annul her vows, and not the father. And so the Gemara says, Hechi Dami, what exactly is the case in the Mishnah? If you're going to say that the case is that the Erusin took place when the girl was a Nara, Ubagra, and then time went by, she became a Bogeres, she became a full adult, and at that point in time we're saying the husband is able to annul her vows, but that's not true. Michti, let us see. Misa Motzia Merishus Av, that's the Bach puts in Merishus Av. When the father dies, so then she's no longer in the Rishus of her father. Ubagras Motzia Merishus Av, and Bagras as well, when she reaches adulthood, she also is no longer in the Rishus of her father. So Ma Misa Lo Nisrokna Rishus Labal, just like we know that if the father dies, we said earlier, the husband does not get the Rishus, he doesn't have the Rishus on his own to be made for her Nedarim. So Af Bagras, so too, when she becomes a full adult, at that point in time, she's no longer in the Rishus of her father, but still Lo Nisrokna Rishus Labal, the husband, meaning the Oros, he should not be able to annul her vows on her own. It should be exactly the same. And so the Gemara says, Ella Shekidsha Kashi Bogeris. Rather, the case actually is that the Kiddushin took place when she was a Bogeris. She had already left the Rishus of her father. Now there's a Kiddushin, there's an Erusin at that point in time. So at that point in time, once there's an Erusin, and that Erusin, as we'll see in a moment, it converts into a Nisuin. It converts into a full marriage after a certain duration of time. So at that point in time, the husband on his own is able to annul her vows. But to that, the Gemara says, Hatanina Chodazimna, that we already learned at one time in a Mishnah later on. The Mishnah later says, Habogeres Sheshoasa Yud Beis Chodesh. Let's say you have a Bogeres and she waits 12 months, meaning she's waiting the general 12 months until the time for the Nisuin, the marriage, is supposed to take place. And the Mefarish over here explains, Bogeres Sheshasa Yud Beis Chodesh Mishin Isarsa. She already had an Erusin. She waited 12 months. That's supposed to be the time of the Nisuin. Rabbi Eliezer Omer Hoel Ubala Chayev B'Mezonoseha Yofer. So Rabbi Eliezer holds, since at that point in time, really there should have been a Nisuin and the husband is Chayev to support her at that point in time, so he also has the ability to annul her vows. It's as if they had the full marriage. It's as if she's in his Rishus. And that's exactly, again, what we're talking about in our Mishnah, but that's what the later Mishnah says. That's what Rabbi Eliezer says, that at that point in time, even though we're talking about an Oris and an Arusa, technically speaking, but since the 12 months have passed, so now the Oris is able to annul her vows. The Gemara will clarify in a moment. The Mefarish brings it over here. Ve'amrina na'lo, we say on that Mishnah, we have to clarify that Mishnah, because we ask on that Mishnah, Hagufa Kasha, the Mishnah itself is internally contradictory. Amrit habogeres sheshoasa yud beis chodesh, it says that she waits for 12 months, Valodin shelo lamed yom, it happens to be by a Bogeres. It's not 12 months. The period of time is actually just 30 days. That's what it says in Ksubis. Nosin lebesula shnei masar chodesh lafarnes atzma liknos malbushim v'tachshitin letzorech nisur mishatava haba. When it comes to a besula, so there she gets 12 months. She has to get the appropriate clothing and adornments from the time of the Erusin. It takes 12 months to accumulate those lehinase to get ready for the marriage. However, ula almana ula bogeres, once she's already a widow or once she's already a bogeres, she's reached full adulthood. She doesn't need that much time. Lamed Yom is just 30 days. The Bogeres Islam Abushin V'Tachshitin, a Bogeres already has the proper clothing. V'Achinami La'almana, the same is true of a widow. V'Islu Ravacha Tuva B'Shloshim Yom, it's plenty of time to give 30 days. V'Kulanim Higia Zamanan, etc. Alma de Bogeres Lobin and Yud Beis Chodesh. So the Gemara deals with that problem, that by a Bogeres you don't need 12 months. What are we talking about 12 months? By a Bogeres, that's what the Gemara here brings. Hagufa Kasha. The Mishnah itself is contradictory. Amr HaBogeres Sheshoasa Shnei Mosar Chodesh. It says a Bogeres 12 months. But Bogeres, Lamali Shnei Masar Chodesh, by a Bogeres, what does she need to wait for 12 months? Bogeres, Balamed Yom Sagila, by a Bogeres, just 30 days is enough. And so the Gemara ends up amending the Mishnah to mean as follows. Tani, it really teaches as follows. Bogeres, by a Bogeres, which is it's just 30 days. Vishashoasa Yud Beis Chodesh. And also, if you have a regular case of a Basula who waits 12 months, in those two cases, that's where we have this halacha, where Rabbi Eliezer says, since the husband is chayiv b'mezonoseh, so he's also able to annul her vows. But in any case, the Gemara says, Mikol Makom Kasha. Nevertheless, it's difficult. That Mishnah already says this halacha by a situation of Kiddushin that takes place when she's a Bogeres, and you wait for this duration of time. We already know that halacha. So why do we have that in this Mishnah as well? And so the Gemara gives two answers. Iboy same, if you want, I could say hacha davka. Here really is the source. Our Mishnah is primary. Ubogeres katani hasam mishum deboy fluge Rebbe Elazar v'Rabbanan. We just bring the Bogeres case over there because there's a machlokas Rebbe Eliezer and the Rabbanan in that later Mishnah. We want to bring the machlokas Rebbe Eliezer and the Rabbanan, so we bring the case of Bogeres as well. Iboy same a Bogeres davkor. You could say that Bogeres over there, that's the primary source. Va'aydi the nasiv reisha bazeh nasiv seifa nami bazeh. But since the reisha of our Mishnah was dealing with the strength that the father has, so we talk about the strength that the husband has, we just bring it, but again, the primary source is later on. And the Mefarish explains, Iboyasema bazu dafka dahach reisha demasnis, and our Mishnah is actually first, it comes first, katani. Dahabal mefer dafka katani lo vogeres v'shashasa, grara naspa, that later case of bogeres and shashasa, that's just brought along, mishum mifluge Rebbe Elazar v'Rabbanan, because we really want to focus over there on the machlokas between Rebbe Eliezer and the Rabbanan, but here is the primary source. V'Iboyasema bogeres to katani b'seifa b'pluksa Rebbe Elazar v'Rabbanan have a dafka. Or you could say the case of bogeres that's brought in the seifa by the argument of Rebbe Elazar and the Rabbanan, that's the primary source. V'hada katani shabal mefer lav dafka, and that which it says that the husband can be mefer, that's the one that's not the primary source, meaning our Mishnah. Ela de nasiv reisha bazeh yipa koach ha'ab, but since in our Mishnah it talks about the strength of the father, so istrich leila misnei nasiv seifa bazeh yipa koach habal. We also bring the fact that the husband has a certain strength, but again, this is not really the primary source, and we'll continue with this discussion in the next video on Daf Ayin Aleph Amud Aleph.